Every election cycle brings the exact same debate to the surface. Do we hand the controls of the state over to the career specialist who understands the complex machinery of government? Or do we bring in the citizen generalist to disrupt the system with private sector efficiency? Public discourse relies heavily on a simple set of assumptions. We tend to view career politicians as entrenched, corrupt bureaucrats, and outsiders as pragmatic problem solvers who can cut through the red tape. But a rigorous look at the empirical evidence shows that an individual's professional background is a deeply flawed predictor of their success in office. To map out how different leaders actually perform, we have to evaluate longitudinal municipal data, the economic incentives of the meritocracy selection model, and 4 distinct global executive case studies. Clinging to these archetypal myths prevents us from engineering effective democratic systems because it distracts us from the actual variables that dictate systemic survival. We need a structured framework to evaluate the performance of both the insider and the outsider. This diagram shows the professional background of a leader along the x-axis, ranging from the lifelong career politician on the left to the non-political citizen entrant on the right. The y-axis tracks measurable governance outcomes, scaling from catastrophic systemic failure at the bottom up to high legislative and administrative efficacy at the top. We will use this matrix to plot the extreme successes and catastrophic failures of both archetypes. History provides spectacular successes and dismal failures across the entire spectrum. The traditional binary debate of insider versus outsider fails to explain these results. The career politician is defined by a narrow occupational background, usually limited to legislative aides or party organizers, a strong ambition for hierarchical climbing, and a deep institutional memory of unwritten procedural rules. To understand who becomes a career politician, political science offers the Mediocracy model. This model filters candidates based on the difference between their marketability in the private sector and their political skill. Individuals with high marketability often treat politics as a showcase. They enter for a single term to reveal their talents and then exit to capture higher wages in the private sector. The individuals who stay behind to become careerists are statistically those whose political skills far exceed their private sector market alternatives. This creates a counterintuitive trap. If you raise the salary of elected officials, the overall quality of the careerist pool actually drops. It makes the office highly attractive to lower ability candidates, while simultaneously reducing the turnover of those who would otherwise leave for the private market. This self-selecting pipeline generates the essential procedural knowledge required to keep the state running, but it also breeds intense ideological rigidity. That rigidity leads to regulatory capture. Long-term exposure to specific interest groups and lobbyists subtly shifts policy to favor those entrenched networks over the broader public. The careerist pipeline selects for political survivalists. They are highly effective at navigating the machinery of the state, but they are highly vulnerable to systemic entrenchment. This chart visualizes the tenure corruption paradox, challenging the assumption that long tenure automatically equates to immediate corruption. It plots a politician's efficiency in providing public goods against their time in office, showing a distinct inverted U-curve. In the early stages of the career, learning by doing drastically improves an official's efficiency. They master the bureaucratic landscape and deliver services effectively. As tenure extends into the late stages, efficiency drops. Corruption requires intimacy, a long-term acquaintance between public officials and private entities to bias tenders or provide unlawful licenses. We see the bottom of this curve in the collapse of Italy's First Republic in the 1990s. Career politicians normalized bribery to fund their clientelistic machines, effectively canceling out political accountability until the entire system collapsed. On the other extreme of the careerist spectrum is Angela Merkel, a PhD-trained physicist who rose through the party ranks. She weaponized institutional memory to maintain 16 years of executive stability. Merkel utilized extreme relational competence to bridge political divides. She masterfully navigated consecutive continental crises through the asymmetric demobilization of her rivals, systematically absorbing their talking points to outmaneuver them. Prolonged political tenure is a dangerous dual-edged sword. It is equally capable of producing extreme legislative effectiveness and concealed systemic rent-seeking. The citizen politician enters office from non-political sectors, usually armed with the promise of bringing disruptive innovation and strict fiscal responsibility to an inefficient state. To test whether private sector business acumen translates to public sector efficiency, we can examine this dashboard mapping an exhaustive study of over 33,000 Russian mayors and legislators. The data reveals a stark reality. Businessperson politicians do not run the government like a business. Under their leadership, municipal deficits and debt levels frequently rise. Instead, they run the government for business. They massively increase expenditures on immediate firm-level economic infrastructure like roads, railroads, and ports. Meanwhile, long-term social capital stagnates. Spending on health and education remains entirely untouched under their administration. These citizen outsiders also actively dismantle competitive, transparent procurement mechanisms, favoring connected firms instead. In many cases, the use of electronic auctions drops by 20%. Disruption often manifests as discretionary rent-seeking in corruption-rate sectors like construction. Importing a private sector profit motive into public administration frequently redirects state resources toward narrow professional interests rather than maximizing broad public welfare. The catastrophic risks of the citizen generalist are visible in the tenure of Thaksin Shinawatra, a billionaire telecommunications CEO who became prime minister in 2001. His attempts to bypass bureaucratic inflexibility triggered massive cronyism in infrastructure projects, provoked intense institutional friction with the established judiciary, and ultimately resulted in a military coup. Yet the highest levels of citizen-entrant efficacy are visible in Mario Draghi. Entering the Italian premiership from the European Central Bank, Draghi brought immense prestige and legitimacy to a highly dysfunctional political landscape. This chart highlights a specific subset of successful outsiders. Leaders educated specifically in economics generate an immediate 1.53% bump in sustained GDP growth, compared to a negative 1.24% decline under non-economist leaders. Draghi used his deep technical leverage to mobilize EU-wide industrial coordination and propose collective debt structures, actions that traditional careerists avoided due to rigid fiscal austerity dogmas. Citizen entrants succeed when their highly specialized external expertise perfectly matches an unmet macroeconomic need, not simply because they possess generic business acumen. We have plotted our case studies, but this flat model misses the controlling variable. Adding a vertical z-axis measures institutional strength and durability. High-functioning systems elevate leaders like Merkel and Draghi, while weak institutions trap Thaksin and the First Republic at the bottom. Strong institutions harness the specific skills of a politician while neutralizing their respective risks. Weak institutions offer a wide menu of strategic options, allowing politicians to violate procedures and magnifying their fatal flaws into systemic crises. The intense public debate over career versus citizen backgrounds is a distraction. Systemic survival is dictated almost entirely by the strength of the guardrails, not the driver. Maintaining those guardrails requires a concept known as institutional forbearance, the deliberate self-restraint by politicians from exercising full legal rights to undermine opponents. Democracy relies heavily on this unwritten norm. Leaders must consciously choose not to weaponize the system against their rivals. Both archetypes present unique threats to this balance. Populist outsiders frequently enter office with a mandate to aggressively break these exact norms, while entrenched careerists quietly cartelize the system to evade accountability. Statecraft requires a perfect symbiosis between the political function of resolving conflict and the administrative function of execution. A functioning democracy doesn't need to choose between the architect and the disruptor. It must relentlessly build institutions strong enough to survive them both.